Well, good morning to all in Europe. Good afternoon to our colleagues in Seoul, and a warm welcome to all participants in this morning's webinar. We have an interpreter, Crystal, with us today, who will offer consecutive translation from Korean to English during the webinar, and who will offer simultaneous translation from English to Korean for colleagues gathered in Seoul. I'm the head of Indices for the Jang group, and my first task today is to introduce our distinguished speakers today. Vice Mayor of the Metropolitan Government, Professor Jang, Chairman of the Financial Industry Policy Committee of Seoul Metropolitan Government, and of course our Executive Chairman, Professor. The programme for the session is here on the slide. We'll aim to have some time for questions by the end of the session, and you can ask questions by typing them, which is in the webinar dashboard at the side of your screen. Putting questions at any time during the event, question time, we'll manage those between us as a panel. But that's all I want to do by way of preamble. Without further delay, I'd like to introduce Mr. Kim, Vice Mayor of Seoul Metropolitan, to offer his welcome. Mr. Kim will be followed by a presentation from Professor Jang. Mr. Kim, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Distinguished guests, I am Kim Seung, Deputy Mayor for Economy at the Seoul Metropolitan Government. I'd like to express my sincere congratulations to GN Group for hosting the GFCI 28 launched together with SMG. It gives me great pleasure to extend my gratitude and warm welcome to financial experts from around the world and all other persons concerned for your attendance. I would especially like to thank Professor Mr. Michael Mainelli, Executive Chairman of GN, and Mr. Michael Wardle for making preparations for this wonderful event. As all of you are well aware, we are currently faced with an unprecedented challenge. The explosive growth of COVID-19 cases and its impact to our daily lives have tipped the global economy into a recession. Fortunately, SMG's every endeavor to tackle the crisis is meeting with success. Voluntary quarantine efforts by citizens, such as wearing masks in public and rigorous investigations on confirmed cases, have kept daily new cases under 100 in this large capital city of 10 million population. Not once has Seoul's financial engine ceased operation since the outbreak of COVID-19. SMG has availed this opportunity to take a bold measure aimed at strengthening its financial competitiveness. Over a period of next 4 years, about $16 million will be invested in fostering innovative financial experts equipped with digital skills in the areas of AI, big data, machine learning, and more. The goal of which is for SMG to build up human resources in the financial sector. As a matter of fact, 142 persons have already enrolled in a digital financial MBA program or a non-degree specialist program and have begun their studies. SMG is also scaling up the Seoul FinTech Lab so as to accelerate financial innovation through FinTech. 30 or more FinTech startups will be recruited, and once the work is complete, we will witness the creation of a colossal FinTech ecosystem accommodating 100 startups and 1,000 people. Aside from digital financial innovation, SMG will make more efforts going forward to become more attractive to leading financial institutions overseas. One of the plans is to create and operate a space dedicated for business networking where foreign financial institutions tapping into SMG can work or hold meetings or seminars. However, I have to say that Seoul still has a long way to go to become an international financial city. In particular, questions still remain as to what direction many of cities should be headed in hereafter. Hopefully, GFCI 28 will serve as a meaningful occasion to guide not only Seoul, but also all financial cities across the globe to the right direction. Thank you so much.
다음에는 저는 서울시 금융산업정책자문위원회 위원장으로 있는 장범식입니다. 지금 오늘 GFCI 28에 참가자에게 깊은 감사 말씀을 드립니다.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am Beom-sik Jang, Chairman of the Financial Industry Policy Committee of the Seoul Metropolitan Government. I would like to thank everyone for taking part in today's launch of Global Financial Centers Index 28, or GFCI.
GFCI 28 결과 분석을 발표하기에 앞서서 오늘 저는 서울시에 그동안 최근에 있었던 금융산업 정책의 주요한 사항들을 여러분들에게 말씀드리고자 합니다. 저는 오늘 이 행사가 서울 금융중심지 정책을 전 세계에 알려드리는 소중한 기회로 활용될 수 있기를 희망합니다.
Before announcing the results and analysis of this GFCI 28, I would like to first give you the overview of financial policies of the Seoul Metropolitan Government. I hope you, as well as the world, will gain more understanding about the financial centers policy of the Seoul Metropolitan Government.
Thank you. Next page, please. 첫 번째 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 서울의 금융 환경에 대해서 말씀드리고자 합니다. 우선 자본시장 제도 선진화가 꾸준히 지속이 되었습니다. 그리고 인프라 조성을 통한 서울 금융산업이 지속적 성장이 이루어졌다는 것을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 우선 주식시장 시가총액은
Can you actually move to the next slide, please?
We will catch the slides up as soon as we can.
네, 다음 장으로 넘어가 주시기 바랍니다. We will go ahead with the presentation.
Okay, we'll go ahead with the presentation. And 자본시장 선진화 제도와 관련해서는 우선 주식시장 시가총액은 2013년도에 1,305억 달러에서 2019년도에는 1조 7,170억 달러로 크게 성장을 했습니다. 특히 외국인 주식의 보유액 증가는 2013년도에 431조 원에서 2019년 말 기준으로는 562조에 달해서 전체 지금 현재 2019년 말 기준으로는 외국인들은 약 33%에 해당되는 한국 주식을 보유하고 있습니다. 연금 부분에서도 커다란
I would like to introduce the financial environment in Seoul and explain efforts and achievements made. By creating infrastructure for the financial sector and advancing financial market institutions, Seoul is growing continuously. As for the market cap, it was in 2013, $130.5 billion US dollars, which increased to $1.77 trillion in 2019. As for the foreign holdings of the Korean stock, it was 431 trillion won in 2013, which increased to 562 trillion won in 2019. So as of end of 2019, you can say that the foreign holding of the Korean stock is 33%.
연금 부분에 있어서는 커다란 변화가 있었습니다. 연금 자산 규모로 서울은 세계 3위의 금융시장의 규모를 가지고 있습니다. 1위가 일본이고요. 2위가 노르웨이고 3위 한국은 5,730억 불의 연금 자산 규모를 자랑하고 있고요. 2019년 기준으로는 운용 자산이 730조 원을 돌파를 했습니다. 그리고 핀테크 산업에 있어서도 지속적 성장이 이루어져서 2019년 4월에는 금융혁신지원 특별법 규제 샌드박스를 제정을 했고 그 기업 숫자도 2011년에 62개에서 2019년 말에는 303개, 투자액도 1조 9천억 원에 이르면서 관련 일자리만 17,000여 개를 창출했습니다. 말씀해 주시죠.
And as for the pensions, we have seen a drastic change in the pension fund management amount. So Korea has the third largest pension fund behind Japan and Norway. And as of 2019, the pension fund exceeded 330 trillion Korean won. And the Special Act on Support for Financial Innovation, the so-called the Regulation Sandbox, was enacted in April 2019, which accelerated the growth of the fintech industry. And now we have 303 fintech firms in Korea with an accumulated investment exceeding 1.9 trillion Korean won.
두 번째 말씀드리고 싶은 것은 서울이 지속 가능하고 안전한 금융 도시라는 것을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. COVID-19에 대응하는 과정에서 대한민국 서울 정부는 신속과 투명이라는 원칙, 협력과 연대, 혁신과 창의, 시민 참여의 네 가지 핵심 전략에 기초해서 코로나19 감염 사태에 아주 신속하게 대응을 한 바 있습니다. 예를 들자면 드라이브스루 진료소를 운영을 했었고요. 철저한 역학조사와 전 국민 의료보험에 기반한 즉시 치료를 지원함으로써 누적 확진자 수를 일정 규모 아래인 4,900명 정도에 묶어놓을 수 있었었고요. 일별 신규 확진자도 100명 이하를 현재 유지를 하고 있습니다. 일상과 방역이 함께 지켜지는 안전한 도시로서의 서울을 유지할 수 있었습니다. 코로나19 상황에서도 멈추지 않은 서울 금융산업의 동력은 여러 곳에서 나타나고 있습니다. 우선 서비스업 생산지수 가운데 금융보험 부분에 있어서는 지난해 동월 대비해서 15%의 증가가 있었다는 말씀을 드립니다. 말씀해 주세요.
I would like to also emphasize the fact that Seoul is becoming a sustainable and safe financial city. And we have based our response to COVID-19 on 4 strategies, which is speed and transparency, cooperation and solidarity, innovation and creativity, and citizen participation. We have implemented drive-through testing centers. We have conducted very strict epidemiological studies. We have rolled out or applied the universal medical care system to provide active treatment to the confirmed patients. So as of today, an accumulated number of confirmed cases of COVID-19 in Korea stands at around 4,900. We have managed to control this level under 100 on a daily basis. So you can say that Seoul has managed to strike the balance between our quarantine measures as well as the everyday life of our citizens. And as for the dynamics of our financial market or sector, in terms of the service indexes or indices for finance and insurance, we have seen an increase of 15% from the same month of the previous year.
세 번째로는 디지털 금융을 통한 혁신 도시로서의 서울에 대하여 말씀드리겠습니다. 서울 핀테크 생태계의 핵심인 서울 핀테크 랩은 발족한 이래 지금 현재 100개의 기업이 입주를 해 있고요. 1000명의 근무 공간으로 확대된 상황입니다. 2019년 말 기준으로 해서 서울 핀테크 랩의 실적을 잠깐 말씀드리면 현재 전체 투자 규모는 약 4,100만 불, 그리고 846명이 고용되어 있고, 그 다음에 전체 매출 규모는 약 4천만 불에 이르고 있습니다. 현재 서울시는 포스트 코로나 시기를 준비를 위한 대규모 핀테크 투자를 지속하고 있습니다. 서울시 주관하에 혁신 성장펀드와 같은 민간 지원 활용을 통해서 핀테크 기업에 3년간 투자를 지속할 계획으로 있습니다. 그래서 2020년과 2022년 동안에 약 2,100억 원 정도의 투자를 계획을 하고 있습니다. R&D 측면에 있어서도 비대면 인증이라든지 보안 등 코로나19 이후에 수요가 증가한 핀테크 R&D 기술 개발 지원을 향후 3년간 총 30개의 과제에 걸쳐서 60억 원을 지원할 계획으로 있습니다. 말씀해 주십시오.
Seoul is also focusing its efforts in promoting digital finance. It launched the Seoul FinTech Lab, or FinTech Lab Seoul, which hosts about 100 companies where 1,000 workers are working. I would like to share with you the results of operating this FinTech Lab Seoul as of end of 2019. So we have seen an investment of $41 million in this lab, and we created 846 jobs with a generated revenue or sales of $40 million. And there's been a massive investment through the fund that is linked to promote the finance sector. And this investment will span about 3 years with 210 billion Korean won going from 2020 until 2022. And Seoul is also expanding its efforts to provide support for the R&D sector or the fourth industrial revolution smart technologies, including content-free authentication and security services. So we are investing 6 billion. We will be implementing 6 billion Korean won worth of projects, which stands at 30 projects going over the next 3 years.
다음으로는 금융교육도시로서의 서울시 정부가 그동안 들여왔던 노력들을 말씀드리고 싶습니다. 특히 2020년에는 서울시 정부와 서울특별시와 금융위원회 그리고 카이스트 주관 아래서 향후 4년간 190억 원을 투입을 해가지고 디지털 금융전문대학원을 지금 운영하고 있습니다. 바로 직전 9월 22일 날 개원식을 가졌습니다. 디지털 금융전문대학원은 두 가지 큰 과정으로 구성되어 있습니다. 첫 번째 것은 디지털 MBA고요. 이것은 학위 과정입니다. 약 2년 정도의 교육기간에 걸쳐서 서울시는 약 80명 내외의 연 80명 내외의 교육 인원들을 배출하고자 합니다. 과정 구성도 특히 디지털 금융의 특화 과정이나 현장 적용 프로젝트, 해외 현장 학습을 통해서 다양한 지금 현재 디지털과 관련된 인공지능, 데이터 사이언스, 핀테크, 파이낸셜 인베스트먼트, 에셋 매니지먼트와 같은 이런 부분들을 구성을 해서 학위 과정을 운영하고 있습니다. 동시에 디지털 금융 전문가 과정을 운영을 해서 약 연 160명 정도를 교육시키고 전체 과정당 한 4과정 정도에 있어서 40명 내외로 구성되어 있습니다. 과정 구성도 우리가 알고 있는 디지털 트랜스포메이션, 클라우드 컴퓨팅, 빅데이터, 블록체인, 클라우드 컴퓨팅 모든 이런 과정들을 통과하면서 여의도를 포함한 서울시의 모든 금융인들을 대상으로 이러한 비학위 과정을 금년에 담대하게 론칭을 했습니다. 말씀해 주시죠.
Seoul is also working very hard to invest in the finance or financial education. So in 2020, with the collaboration of the Seoul city government, the FSC, as well as KAIST, we have opened up a financial graduate school. So we plan to invest 19 billion Korean won over the next 4 years in this digital educational program. And the graduate school was opened in September 22nd this year. The graduate school provides 2 types of programs. First is an MBA program, which is a degree program of 2 years. We plan to nurture or educate 80 people over the next 2 years. So the program includes courses focusing on digital finance, as well as some practical field experience, as well as overseas study experience programs and overseas exchange programs. And the topics that it will deal with are digital transformation, AI, data science, IoT, asset management, and so forth. So that was for the degree program, but we also offer non-degree program in fostering financial experts. So we plan to nurture 160 experts through this program, and it will be 40 people in 4 different courses. And we will, in that way, nurture a lot of financial talents and skilled workers in Seoul.
다음으로는 글로벌 네트워킹 도시로서의 서울시가 해외 금융기업에 다양한 서비스를 제공하고 있는 부분을 말씀드리겠습니다. 우선 서울 금융중심지에 진입하는 국내 금융기관에게 업무 공간을 지원하기 위해서 서울국제금융오피스를 개설을 했습니다. 예컨대 미국의 셀레니언 자산운용사나 싱가포르의 KCA 파트너스, 중국의 유니언 시즌 홀딩스와 같은 이러한 금융회사들이 현재 입주해 있습니다. 동시에 서울시는 서울 금융 네트워킹 공간으로서 서울을 방문하는 모든 국내외 금융기관 종사자들에게 공유 공간을 제공을 하고 이러한 세미나실, 회의실, 라운지, 국제회의장 등을 그러한 장소로서 활용될 수 있도록 다양한 공간 서비스를 제공하고 있습니다. 말씀해 주십시오.
Seoul is also trying to become a financial city of global networking or facilitating global networking. So the Seoul Metropolitan Government has set up Seoul International Financial Office and its networking space. So we will provide networking spaces for financial institutions, especially global financial institution workers or personnel who will be visiting Korea. And as for the U.S. Selenium or the KCA Partners of Singapore and Union Season Holdings of China, they have already moved into this international finance office. And Seoul City Government is also trying to provide a lot of financial working spaces to many financial workers, including spaces for seminars, conferences, as well as a lounge. So we are operating this shared workspace service as well.
네, 끊임없는 혁신과 변화를 통해서 금융도시 서울을 만들고자 합니다. 다시 한번 오늘 중요한 GFCI 28 발표 행사를 준비해 주신 ZN그룹에 다시 한번 감사를 드립니다. 감사합니다.
Seoul will continue to work hard to become a global financial city with relentless innovation and change. I would like to once again thank the ZN Group for organizing today's GFCI 28 launch event. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Professor Jang, for that brilliant presentation, giving us an overview of how things are now in Seoul. The next task is for me to present to you the GFCI 28 results. And the Global Financial Centers Index is part of the ZN Long Finance Program, through which we research finance, sustainability, economics, technology, and science, including our research into financial centers and what makes financial centers competitive and work. The GFCI is a factor assessment index. This means that we combine 2 different types of data. First of all, quantitative data series, the instrumental factors in the index, that measure aspects of economic and business performance of countries and cities. Second, survey assessments provided by finance professionals across the world. And we use a machine learning algorithm to combine those 2 types of data into a single rating of centers' progress. For GFCI 28, we researched 121 centers, of which 111 feature in the index itself. They are spread widely across the world, and we're very pleased that we have such a global spread. Respondents to the GFCI survey, first of all, are drawn from a wide range of sectors in financial services, banking, finance, fintech, government, investment management, insurance, and we're very pleased that we have a broad range of respondents. In terms of the location of respondents, the majority of people who respond to our survey are from Asia Pacific. I think it shows the great interest that people in that region of the world have in financial development. And indeed, it's been one of the stories of the Global Financial Centers Index over time that Asia Pacific centers have continued to join the index and to develop. So in GFCI 28, this is a table showing the top 25 centers, with New York continuing to come first in the index, but London making up a lot of ground in terms of its rating compared with New York in this edition of the index, compared with GFCI 27, which we published in March. The top 10 centers in the index all rose in their ratings in this edition, suggesting there was confidence in these centers even during the challenges faced by them in the COVID-19 pandemic. Outside the top 10, however, many centers in the index, not just in the top 25, but throughout the index, fell back in the ratings, suggesting that there is something at the moment which is giving people less confidence in financial centers than before. And this may be related to the uncertainties produced by the COVID-19 situation, the expectation of economic disruption, and some of the other disruptive factors around trade and social issues that we see in various parts of the world. Shanghai took third place in this edition from Tokyo, reversing the positions in GFCI 27, but only 1 point in the ratings between those two centers, as it was the other way around in GFCI 27. Hong Kong and Singapore follow close behind. Seoul, I'm very pleased to say, on this occasion, moved up 8 places in the rankings to take 25th place in the GFCI 28, and my congratulations to colleagues in Seoul for that performance. We can look at the ratings of the top 5 centers in each region over time. And the real story here is there are 3 leading regions, Asia Pacific coming top, Western Europe and North America, and those 3 increasing slightly their average ratings for the top 5 centers in this edition. Other regions have fallen back. As I said, most centers in the index this time have fallen back in the ratings, and that's particularly true in centers outside those leading 3 groups. In terms of the top 5 centers and their ratings over time, you'll see, as I mentioned, that uptick in this edition of the index for the top centers, but also you'll see that over time the performance of those centers has narrowed. Very much, it was the case that New York and London were out ahead. They're very much more closely aligned now at the top of the index. In terms of ranking, the story here is really about the growth of Shanghai, I guess, over time. New York and London still take the top placings. Shanghai, for the first time, has moved into 3rd place in the rankings, and you'll see from the purple line on this graph that Shanghai's performance over time just demonstrates, I think, the strength of the Chinese economy and the consequent importance of Shanghai as a financial center as things have moved forward. I'm going to talk about each of the regions in a little more detail. In Western Europe, ratings for centers in this region did fall overall, but by less on average than they did for the index as a whole. Leading Western European centers, as you'll see from this chart, continue to perform well, and London, I've already mentioned, made up considerable ground against New York in this edition of the index. In Asia Pacific, there was a more mixed performance. 10 centers fell in the ratings, with 14 improving. Taipei, Chengdu, and Qingdao all rose more than 30 places in the rankings. As I've already mentioned, amongst the leading centers in Asia Pacific, Seoul rose 8 ranking points, which was a very good performance. In North America showed least volatility in the ratings, falling only 1.3% on average in the ratings in GFCI 28. 6 North American centers are now in the top 20 of the GFCI, and North America continues to be a very strong region in terms of its financial performance, both in the US and indeed in Canada. Eastern Europe and Central Asia, all centers in this region fell back in the ratings quite sharply in GFCI 28. And so I think there's a lack of, potentially lack of confidence in centers in this region. Having said that, Moscow, Istanbul, Athens all rose in the rankings, so they were comparatively more successful than some other centers. Turning to the Middle East and Africa, there again was a mixed performance, but all centers fell in the ratings. The winners in this sense were Abu Dhabi, who rose 6 places in the rankings, Mauritius and Cape Town. But on the whole, again, performance in Middle East and Africa was slightly disappointing. And similarly in Latin America and the Caribbean, while a lot of the centers here rose in the rankings, they fell in the ratings. And the average rating fall in this region was 8%, which is more than the average for the index overall. So the message from all of this, I think, is that there has been quite mixed results this time, but there's a real difference between the 3 leading regions, Western Europe, Asia Pacific, North America, and the other regions of the world which have seen worse performance in this edition of the index, which is probably related to people's view about how the COVID-19 crisis will affect the economies of different parts of the world moving forward. I want to turn to the instrumental factors, the quantitative measures that underlie the GFCI model. We organize these into 5 areas, and those areas are areas of competitiveness which we think are important for the development of financial centers. What we can then do is to run the index model using just the quantitative measures which relate to those parts of the business, so business environment, human capital, infrastructure separately. This gives different rankings to the main index and really shows the strengths of some individual centers. So while somewhere like New York is strong across all areas of development, some centers, for example, Geneva for business environment, score a lot higher than their overall GFCI index rating, giving a sense that they have a particular strength in that area. We use the range and spread of assessments from financial professionals in other centers and the range of instrumental factor scores to classify centers according to whether they are global, international, or local, and to assess whether they are leaders with breadth and depth in financial services, diversified, which means they have good breadth of services, specialist centers, which have particular strengths, or developing centers. Seoul, for example, stands in this classification as a global diversified center, so a good spread of financial services, good spread of indicators, and well connected across the world. We also then look at the data and run the model using only the responses to the GFCI survey that we receive from people working in different parts of financial services, banking, investment management, insurance, etc. This allows us to look at industry sector sub-indices, and on this measure, interestingly, Shanghai, for example, takes the top place in insurance, which means that those people working in insurance across the whole world rated Shanghai very well, compared with people working in other sectors. You'll see that Seoul again features here in insurance at 12th ranking place, compared with 25th place overall in the index. And so this again gives a really useful indication to financial centres on where their strengths sit and where perhaps they need to do some development. Looking at reputational advantage, this is a measure we use of taking the overall result of the GFCI with the assessments which have been given in our GFCI survey and comparing the two. Places with a positive reputation advantage, and this slide shows the top 15 centres in terms of reputation advantage, we think are probably being scored by people. They're being rated by people in our questionnaire higher than the underlying quantitative data suggests they might be. Because of reputational reasons, of course, places like New York, London, Shanghai, the leading centres in the index, do have a good reputation and appear on this list. But there are other centres here where the message, I think, is that they need to think about the underlying strength of the ecosystem of their financial services in order to demonstrate they're performing as well as their reputation would suggest. At the other end of this this mix are those people who have a reputational disadvantage, a negative reputational advantage in the index. This again shows people where actually the quantitative data shows they're probably doing better than their reputation as measured by the results from the GFCI survey. So somewhere like Mumbai or Jakarta, we think are underperforming against their underperforming in reputational terms, and they have a marketing task to take on in order to improve. I'd like to move on now to invite Professor Michael Mainelli, Executive Chairman of the ZN Group, to offer some observations and comments on other aspects of the GFCI on this occasion.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Kim. Thank you very much, Mr. Kim, Professor Jang, and Mike. I think all of us will be remembering 2020 as the year of COVID, and you might find that for somebody like me who's been looking at this index for the last 15 years, every 6 months, that I find this a bit dull and boring. But I will certainly remember 2020 as a year that the index has changed somewhat markedly, and make some speculative comments. I'd like to talk briefly about fintech, work patterns, and regions. So this slide here will show you our GFCI fintech rating. Now, we have another index, the Smart Centers Index, which looks at science and technology in the round, but this is a focus in on fintech. And I think what we're seeing here is a rise in potentially the centers that come out of multi-center financial center countries. So a federal country like Canada or America or whatever may well be rising. So if you look at this slide, you'll notice in China, which has 13 centers in the index, Shenzhen and Hong Kong coming up. If you look at America, San Francisco and Boston moving up. If you look at the UK, Edinburgh. So in these multi-center regions, we may be seeing a flight of the technology component of financial services to smaller, perhaps better quality of life, as the increasing digitalization means they don't need to be so co-located with the direct financial services themselves. You might also note in Professor Jang's presentation, he pointed out the efforts that Seoul has made, which are bearing fruit in fintech, having risen 9 points in the ranking in what is a more unitary country like Korea. This next slide looks at some of the characteristics of fintech. And here you'll see two spider diagrams. On the left, we look at the types of activity that constitute fintech. It's very clear that people are looking for big data, payment transaction services, cybersecurity, and to a lesser degree, credit risk. I might point out we are anticipating an enormous increase in online machine learning-based tools for conferences such as this, simply because the quantity of information being recorded about human interactions via video conferencing has clearly exploded over the last 6 months. And this may be an important feature in the way that fintech moves forward in terms of overcoming some of the reduced human interactions which have long been seen to be fundamental to finance. On the right, you'll see a spider diagram looking at some of the elements of fintech, and I would just highlight access to finance, availability of skilled staff. You would expect that. But the third one is an ecosystem or cluster that actually encourages technology and finance to work together. And here, I would definitely draw attention to some of the things that Professor Jang emphasized, the work that they've been doing, laying in a foundation of educational support and encouraging the networking connections without necessarily going into direct subsidy, an area which we've typically seen doesn't work. So the role of government is becoming clearer in nurturing fintech, and government nurturing fintech can make significant results within a policy framework of support without direct subsidy. The next slide looks at some of the future work patterns after COVID-19. Well, we're all going to be guessing here for some time, but I must say that the sentiment is extremely strong that working from home is here to stay, certainly in financial services and possibly even more in technology if one wishes to split the two. So in surveys, people are expecting virtually no change, expecting the time spent on client premises, which is typically about 20% of the time, but the other 80% is up for grabs, and the existing 20% shift from office to home is expected to continue. In fact, it's even stronger than that when you talk to the chief executives. We surveyed approximately 135 chief executives last month, and 84% of them expected working from home to increase. So if the bosses are leading in that direction, there's fundamental change yet to come. If we look at this slide that follows, it's the future work patterns, and it's looking here at some of the regional results. Mike pointed out Western Europe earlier as being a region that's done reasonably well through all of this. Western Europe also stands out working from home. There we're looking at people anticipating about 60% of their time in the future working from home, and that's significantly higher than the next region, which is North America. Perhaps because COVID-19 hasn't had quite the impact in Asia. Asia seems to be looking at more of a return to normal, a return to what things were like in 2019. If we turn to the following slide, I just wanted to talk for a moment about financial centers and their strengths. We've used this slide often. You can't be an international center without international people. The successful people want to live in the place. It needs to be cosmopolitan. It needs to build a reputation over some period of time, and trust is what holds it all together. But a lot of this was predicated upon physical interactions amongst people. And it is notable that the economic hit to the cities in which the financial centers are located correlates in almost an exponential way with the degree of commuting. So, for example, London and New York have had a pretty terrible time during COVID, and yet the Southeast England or the New York cluster in financial services have done very well. In fact, they've had bumper years. So we're seeing a tremendous change in what we mean by a financial center looming ahead. Now, I am certainly somebody who believes that financial centers have a strong future and that finance has an important place in the world. But I do anticipate some significant changes in the physical geography that underpins them. I'd like to conclude just with a slide that I think is very important. When we give these presentations, people say, well, that's great. You've bombarded us with statistics. What does it all mean, really? And I think this is what I'll be looking for, particularly in GFCI 29 and 30, is the changing landscape of trade. We've seen a lot of changes in trade over the last year. We could talk about some of the incidents, Huawei, Hong Kong, Brexit. There's a lot going on out there. But over time, the one thing that we've noticed is that the biggest strategy for success is to treat all comers fairly. And if you do that through things like making sure that it's easy to set up a business, making sure profits can be repatriated, making sure taxation is equal, easy visa access, you tend to do very well. And this is still the enduring element of a financial center. Thank you, Mike.
Thank you very much, Michael. If I can invite also Professor Jang and Mr. Kim to join us on the panel. We do have some questions to the panel, and I will field those as best I can. So the first question I think is probably for myself and for Michael, asking or just making the point that politics don't seem to have an impact on GFCI ratings, and I guess asking for our comments on that. And I think it depends on, for me, on how you look at political impact. It does seem that financial services are seen almost to be outside of the political landscape, unless politics is having an effect on economic development in a country, or elements of social unrest or trade strength. So what financial commentators look at, I think, is rather than the raw politics of what's going on, they look at whether that politics is having an impact on the financial indicators that really matter. And so we do see people responding, I think, to politics, but at one remove, when they see the impact of the political decisions coming through to the economic infrastructure and measures which make a difference. I don't know whether other members of the panel would like to comment on that question. Is politics a factor which is affecting financial centres' credibility?
I might add to that, Mike. I think it's very early days, really, in the COVID era, and we're seeing a tremendous amount of quantitative easing of various forms, asset support. And so this boom in financial services over the past 6 months is very clearly due to the politics and almost a side effect of it. So I think there's a long way to go there. So I believe politics has a fundamental effect, but maybe at the moment financial services is a sideline benefiting from current policy directed at something else entirely.
A question for our colleagues in Seoul. There's a question of what have been the great successes and the greatest challenges of the fintech strategy that you have adopted in Seoul.
Mr. Kim?
제가 답변을 드리도록 할까요?
네.
네.
네, 먼저 하시죠. 먼저 하십시오. 예, 하십시오. 네.
그 핀테크 기술에서 그 다양한 우위를 서울이 가지고 있는 것은 사실인데, 실제로 이제 그게 이 우수한 인재를 모으는 것이 가장 힘든 부분이었습니다. 그래서 핀테크를 다룰 수 있는 재주를 가진 사람들을 원하고 있지만, 실제로 이제 공급할 수 있는 인력은 충분하지 않았기 때문에, 아까 우리 장 위원장님께서 말씀하셨던 서울에서 핀테크를 중심으로 하는 디지털 금융대학원을 설치했던 이유도 그런 인재를 좀 양성하고자 했던 것입니다. 그래서 충분하게 인재만 확보된다면 서울이 특장점으로 내세우고 있는 그 다양한 이제 기술을 응용하는데 큰 도움이 되지 않을까 생각하고 있습니다.
Yes, it is true that Seoul has a competitive advantage in terms of our technology, our technological excellence. If I have to mention one of the challenges that we had to face, it is actually attracting or rather nurturing or developing skilled workers or talents. So I believe that the lack of a very skilled fintech pool of talents is one of the challenges that we're facing today. And as Chairman Jang said, so in order to address that kind of challenges in the fintech industry, that is why we have set up this financial graduate school in order to nurture talents. So if we successfully manage to nurture talents through this initiative, I believe that this will be very useful to apply the technologies in which we have a competitive advantage.
마이크가 질문했었던 그 사항과 그 다음에 우리 김 실장님이 말씀하셨던 사항들에 조금 하나를 좀 더 덧붙이고 싶습니다. 우선 한국에서 이번에 그 핀텍의 그 랭크가 아까 프로페서 마이넬리가 보여주셨던 것처럼 저희가 9단계나 레이팅에서 퍼포먼스를 굉장히 아주 이번에 좋은 퍼포먼스를 보여줬는데요. 저는 다른 한편의 생각을 보면 특히 핀텍과 관련해서는 서울시 정부가 지난 한 3년 동안 지속적으로 핀텍 산업을 육성하고 서울시의 이런 핀텍 밸리와 같은 이런 부분에 대해서 아주 적극적이고 아주 긍정적인 그런 의지를 가지고 정책을 일관성 있게 추진해 나왔던 것, 이 부분이 사실 서울시의 그 핀텍 산업들이 최근에 그런 핀텍 랩을 100개나 이렇게 하고, 그 다음에 외국 기업들이 핀텍 랩에 들어와서 사무실 개설을 하고는 이런 것과 모두 연관되어서 서울 여의도 금융 중심지를 중심으로 해서 핀텍을 굉장히 육성하고자 하는 이런 부분들이 굉장히 큰 역할을 했다라고 생각을 합니다.
So I would like to add some comments regarding Michael's question as well as Deputy Mayor Kim's remarks. So yeah, it is quite astonishing, and it's quite a remarkable achievement that the Seoul achieved a 9-notch higher ranking in this edition of Index. The Seoul Metropolitan Government over the past 3 years has made a lot of efforts to nurture the fintech industry, and it has shown a very active commitment to promoting the fintech valley. And one of the important things to note is that it has conducted or implemented a very coherent policy in that regard. And that is why we're seeing the results such as the FinTech Lab Seoul accommodating 100 companies, tenant companies, and a lot of foreign firms moving into this lab. So the Seoul city government has played a very important role and shown a very important commitment to nurturing the financial center of Seoul, focused on the area of Yeouido.
Thank you very much. I'd just like to move on. We've got a specific question about the Digital Finance MBA. Congratulations from the member of the audience who's asking the question for setting up this, but asking in particular, will cybersecurity be part of the digital transformation element of the MBA courses? And secondly, how the course is funded. What's the mix of government and individual funding for the digital MBA?
실장님,
그 학위 과정에서는 핀테크에서 가장 사이버 보안이 굉장히 중요한 요소인 것은 틀림이 없습니다. 그런데 지금 서울시에서 운영하고 있는 그 디지털 금융대학원에서 학위 과정에서는 그 사이버 보안을 전문으로 다루는 영역이 그렇게 그 비중이 크지 않지만, 지금 현재 이 핀테크 쪽이나 아니면 금융권에 일하고 있는 사람들을 위한 비학위 그 전문 과정에서는 사이버 보안을 중요한 요소로 다루고 있고요. 그다음에 그 금융전문대학원이 이번에 처음으로 그 문을 열었음에도 불구하고 경쟁률이 상당히 높았었습니다. 그 이유는 서울에서 정책적으로 서울시와 또 그 중앙정부인 금융위원회에서 학생들에게 그 장학금으로 학비 한 50% 정도를 지원해주는 그런 메리트가 있기 때문에 우수한 인력들이 많이 모였습니다.
또 다른 한편 말씀을 드리면 서울 이 부분에 관해서는 서울시 정부가 이번에 그 디지털 금융 전문대학원을 설치하는데 엄청난 노력과 자원을 사실은 투자를 했고요. 또 못지않게 중앙정부에서도 이 부분에 대해서 노력을 기울이고 있습니다. 지금 현재 정부가 디지털 뉴딜이라는 그런 그 큰 캠페인을 지금 벌이면서 엄청난 자원을 투입을 하고 있습니다. 매년 금년도에 12만 명, 그리고 내년도에 17만 명을 대상으로 해서 금융인들과 비금융인들을 대상으로 한 이런 그 디지털 교육들, 여기에는 디지털 트랜스포메이션에 대응하는 빅데이터, 블록체인, 그 다음에 클라우딩이라든지, 그 다음에 AI와 같은 이런 부분 쪽들을 금융에 접목시키기 위한 그런 교육들을 대대적으로 하고 있고, 이런 부분들이 우리 서울시 정부와 그 다음에 중앙정부가 코업들을 하면서 앞으로 한국의 금융 쪽에 있어서의 그 핀텍 쪽들에 상당한 그런 많은 더 도움을 줄 것으로 생각을 하고 있습니다.
Yes, so with regards to the MBA program and the program on the cybersecurity, of course, yes, as you said, cybersecurity is a very important element for fintech. As of now, I mentioned that in our program, it's divided into degree and non-degree. So degree is the MBA program, and the cybersecurity does not take up a large, important portion of that program. However, in the non-degree mastership program, which is provided to financial workers or financial specialists, we deal cybersecurity as an important element of that program. And as we said, we mentioned that we opened up this financial graduate school for the first time this year, and the enrollment competition was very fierce and very intense. So, and we were able to see a lot of achievements thanks to also the policy support from the Seoul City government, but also the Financial Supervisory Committee. And the support is provided in terms of tuition. So the participants get a 50% funding for their tuition, which serves as a merit to attract a lot of talent to this graduate educational program. And Chairman Jang also added that the city, not only the Seoul City government has made a lot of effort and invested a lot of resources in this educational program, but there were also efforts made by the central government. So the central government announced the Digital New Deal this year, and it announced that it's going to provide a digital education to 120,000 people this year and 170,000 people next year. And when we talk about digital education, it's an education about how to apply digital transformation, big data, blockchain, cloud, and AI to finance. So as you can see, the Seoul City government and the central government are collaborating very closely to nurture the fintech industry as a whole.
그리고 프로그램의 재원을 여쭤보셨거든요.
그
정부가 얼마나
현재까지는 앞으로 4년 동안 총 190억 가운데에서 서울시가 100억 원, 그다음 중앙정부가 90억 원을 부담하는 구조로 되어 있습니다.
As for the funding of this financial program, educational program I mentioned about, so it's 90 billion Korean won of investment over the next 4 years. 10 billion will be funded by the Seoul City government and 9 billion by the central government.
제가 한 가지 좀 질문해도 될까 모르겠습니다.
So I would like to also ask one question.
이번 GFCI Q&A에서 이제 서울시의 이 순위 상승을 볼 수 있어서 좀 기쁘긴 한데요. 아마도 이제 금년 상반기에 전 세계를 강타했던 코비드 19의 영향도 일부는 있었을 텐데 아마 그 영향이 충분히 반영된 것 같지는 않습니다. 그런데 실제로 보면 이제 핀테크의 경우에도 서울의 경우에 상당한 기술은 가지고 있었지만 실제 생활에서 응용이 안 되는 그런 아쉬움이 그동안 있었는데 역설적으로 코로나 바이러스가 이제 심각해지면서 전화로 혹은 앱을 통해서 핀테크를 이용해서 주문도 하고 배달 주문도 하면서 그 시장이 굉장히 커지고 있는데 이런 부분들이 이 다음 순위에서는 그러니까 코로나 영향이 이런 내용들을 포함해서 코로나의 영향이 앞으로 있을 순위 변화에 어떤 영향을 미칠지 혹시 전망하는 부분이 있는지가 좀 궁금합니다.
So yes, I am very pleased that the Seoul's ranking went up for the GFCI 28. However, as you may well know, with the outbreak of COVID-19, it is having an impact on financial centers around the world. And I believe that the impact of COVID-19 has not been fully reflected in this edition of the GFCI 28. Seoul indeed had a lot of leading technologies available in the fintech industry in the past, but the difficulties or the challenges that we had were actually applying these very latest technologies to our everyday lives. But with the spread of COVID-19, people are picking up a lot of fintech services, using apps and telephone to order food or have some things delivered to their homes. So there's a lot of pickup in the fintech industry due to the spread of COVID-19 as well. So I would like to know if these kind of trends if it continues, will be reflected in the next edition of this index, or what are your outlook on this?
Mike, shall I pick that up?
Yeah, sure.
Well, it's an absolutely excellent question, Mr. Kim. And I think one of the things to be careful of in any index like this is as you rise, you tend to bounce around a lot. You may recall the view of Shanghai over 15 years, where it came from being effectively not part of the global financial network into rising into number 2. But there are a lot of bounces along that way. So rises are often accompanied by falls, is all I'm warning about there. I think when you look at the effect of COVID-19, you're absolutely correct. We're really only catching the first wave of this. And if we're 6 months in and the index is just out, and we have, one might argue, at least a year till vaccines are available and possibly substantially longer, yes, we anticipate a huge change here. And I personally am concerned about what's going to start happening in terms of property prices, commercial versus retail. And so I think we're going to see a lot more change in the index, but we're going to be seeing, I think, this move to more of a regional cluster.
We're running short of time, but I'm going to squeeze a few more questions in if I may. One, I guess, to Michael, saying, noting that London is going back a lot of what it had lost in GFCI 26 and 27. And what do you think will be the main drivers of that uptick?
Right. Well, the first is it's a good example of the bounce back. So people tend to make too much. We're humans, so we see a list of numbers and we want to know who's number 1 and number 2. And actually, I tend to look at the ratings. And on a 1,000-point scale, a movement of greater than 20 needs a good look. Below that, I see it as noise. However, in this case, London did rise 24 points, and I think there were a few things about it. One is the infrastructure in London, which has widely been seen to be not top-notch, particularly in terms of broadband, actually functioned very well. So the working from home infrastructure functioned brilliantly. Second thing is we saw increased productivity. People were gaining. London is an intense commuter city. People are losing an hour to 2 hours a day in travel, let alone preparation, and suddenly those hours are freed up. So I think that was a big element of it. And some of the cost base in financial services actually dropped. And all of this combined, of course, as we were talking earlier, with a huge government injection of cash into the monetary system, therefore creating a bumper year in asset prices. So I think, any of those things could change quite soon. And so Mr. Kim's right. We're at a very early stage in this.
Just very briefly, I'm going to comment on 2 questions we've had in. One about what are the most significant reasons for Shanghai's improvement. And I think the thing to take from Shanghai, and in the full published report of GFCI 28, we actually have a supplement based on Shanghai as a financial center, because it is a notable center in terms of its improvement over time. And I think it is because Shanghai has been the center of China's engagement with the real economy, both in terms of trade, finance, insurance, managing the internal infrastructure development within China and some of Chinese investments overseas. And Shanghai has been seen as the place where that link happened between China's economic growth and investment from the world and out into the world from China. So that's a very short answer, but do read the supplement that's in GFCI 28 in the full report for more details about Shanghai. The second question was about Tokyo's position in the fintech rating, because it fell quite significantly. And I think that the fintech ratings are quite new, and as Michael was saying, centers will tend to move up and down a bit. And I think what has happened in this edition is not so much that fintech has fallen back, but other centers' strengths have really come through. And so maybe you're overtaken in the rankings in this edition. But we'll be watching very carefully the fintech rankings, because all the financial centers in the world that I talk to at the moment talk to me about fintech. It is the one thing where financial centers are looking for competitive advantage, looking to attract talent, looking to be the best. And so we'll be looking very carefully to see how that competition between financial centres plays out as we go forward. I'm really sorry that's all we have time for today. We're 5 minutes over time, and thank you very much for those who've continued with us. It's been a fascinating occasion. I just wanted to say we've had one comment in the questions, just saying it's a fascinating presentation, particularly in the current troubled circumstances. So please pass on my thanks to the speakers for that. We are launching, obviously, today GFCI 28, which we produce in partnership with the China Development Institute in Shenzhen, who are doing their own launch in China at the same time as we're launching the English edition here. But we also are already starting to look forward to GFCI 29, which will be published in March 2021, when things may have changed in the world and we may actually be able to visit each other, at least to some limited extent. And so we are looking forward to GFCI 29. Do take part in the GFCI survey. The details are on the screen here. We will let you have, after this event, a link to a recording of this event so that you can watch it again because it was so good, or you can share it with your friends. And we'll also, of course, in that share a copy or a link to where you can find a copy of these slides to take it forward. Just remains for me, we ought to, on this occasion, have a very large round of applause for our distinguished speakers today, Vice Mayor Kim, Professor Jang, Professor Michael Mainelli. Unfortunately, we don't have an audience able to offer a large round of applause, so you'll have to have a very small round of applause. My sincere thanks to you all, and my thanks also to the audience. Do keep in touch and do ask any questions you have by email after the event. Many thanks indeed, and have a very good weekend all.
Bye.
Be safe.
Bye-bye.